coming up soon.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, and good evening, good night, or good morning to all of you. We are pleased to have people at this meeting from all parts of the world in different time zones. I am Ashley Sananan, an independent researcher specializing in historical studies. I hold a bachelor's degree in history with a minor in literature from the University of the West Indies. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. And like today, we often partner with the Amina Ghafoor Institute for the Study of Indentureship and its legacies, led by Professor David Dabadine. In order to continue this weekly forum and to make it bigger and better, we are asking for suggestions and volunteers. If you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials. Please contact Dr. Mahabir for details. Today, ladies and gentlemen, let us remember that Hindus are celebrating Phagua or Holi, the spring festival of colors. Roman Catholics are observing Lent for 40 days, and our Muslim brothers and sisters are observing Ramadan by fasting and reciting prayers. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our moderator today, who is Shalima Mohammed, the co-director of this Thought Leaders Forum, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. Shalima, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Namaste. And a warm welcome to you from a very hot and sunny Trinidad. I want to thank you very much for choosing to be here with us. As always, our program is being recorded on Zoom and live streamed on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. To all of you on YouTube at this time, welcome. I just want to remind our speakers to avoid intrusions from trolls. Our IT manager has muted everyone, so please do not admit anyone, do not unmute anyone, and do not allow anyone to share your screen. Thanks so much for your cooperation. Our topic today was inspired by the work of Dr. Gabrielle Hussein and Dr. Lisa Autar, both of whom have kindly joined us and who may be addressing us a little bit later. So the topic is reimagining feminism after Indian indentureship. And it's especially poignant to convene this forum today, International Women's Day, as we recognize that our world is still contending with colonial divide and rule tactics and the legacies of labor exploitation. Centering the voices and strategies born from the experience of Indian indentureship is not just an historical exercise. It's a vital contribution to today's urgent movements for equity and collective liberation. Building on the foundations of the 2016 anthology by Dr. Gabrielle Hussein and Dr. Lisa Autar, which sought to trace a genealogy of Indo-Caribbean feminist thought, our speakers today will explore the individual and collective feminist mobilizing strategies emerging from communities irrevocably shaped by the system of Indian indentureship, a system that moved not just bodies, but politics and knowledge across the world. We seek to understand, firstly, how the history of indentureship shaped distinctive feminist strategies and challenges. Secondly, the ways in which feminisms challenge colonial divide and rule practices and patriarchal controls. And thirdly, the similarities and differences among feminist organizing landscapes ranging from Mauritius, the Caribbean, and their global diasporas. It's my pleasure, therefore, to introduce our first speaker, and this is Professor Sina Kloss of Germany. She recently held a visiting professorship in anthropology of the Americas at the University of Bonn. Her research focuses on body modifications in Hindu communities in Suriname, Guyana, and Trinidad. Although she is live with us, she's kindly prepared a pre-recorded video, and we'll bring that to you now. Can we have that, please?
Good afternoon, good evening, and greetings from Germany. My name is Sina Kloss. I'm a social and cultural anthropologist based at the University of Bonn, and I've been conducting research since 2011 in Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. And today I'm very happy to have been invited into this conversation, and I want to give a perspective on reimagining feminism after indenture through the particular example of Godnas, and want to reflect also on the significance of this history to descendants of indentured laborers, or would rather like to discuss this with you. I have pre-recorded this presentation as my son is sleeping next door and he could wake up anytime, so to not have any interruptions, excuses for the pre-recording. And as I've already mentioned, I want to revisit a practice today that many Indo-Caribbean families probably know, or maybe think they know: Godna, the tattooing of Hindu women, especially Hindu women, I have to say. And in the talk today, I want to give you an overview of Godna as submission, what women, senior women say about this. Subversion in context as a subchapter I'm going to speak about, and so on. So I will walk you through this, but before I do so, a brief overview of my anthropological methodology. So I conducted for this particular project that started on Godnas, a so-called multi-sided ethnography in Guyana, in Suriname, and Trinidad, but also in the Netherlands, in the Surinamese diaspora of The Hague. I also conducted a bit of archival research, but focused mostly on oral history interviews. All of this research could not have been done without the support, the massive support of my friends and informants, interlocutors in Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, and Tobago. So thank you very much to all of you. I cannot mention all of you in detail, but I want to highlight especially Daro, Bowandin, and the Bowandin and Sukram families of Kanji Berbice, who introduced me to the topic of Godna. And so I remain indebted to them for this introduction and for the continuing support of my research. You have maybe heard of Godnas, and if you have heard about Godnas, very likely it's the case that you heard about the dominant interpretation that you can find about Godna today, and that is that they are marks or symbols of Hindu wives' submission to their husband. And I am not completely challenging that, but I want to add another layer to this discussion, and I want to ask today, what if these Godna tattoos were not only marks of submission, but at the same time, or at a different time, also instruments of subversion, and not of open rebellion, not what today we would perceive modern feminist resistance, but something rather quiet, embodied, and historically specific. Kind of a form of ritual and social subversion from within constrained worlds. So I hinted already at the dominant interpretation, Godna as submission. And here we do have one example of a Godna Before I dive into this further, I want to say that I limited the numbers of photographs that I'm presenting to you and carefully selected the frames to not or to try not to objectify the women with whom I worked. If I had more time, I would give you more life history and then other pictures as well. But yeah, for this purpose, I have reduced the number of photographs in today's presentation. Godnas or godnas, the plural refers to tattooing practices and the tattoos that were common among Hindu women, sometimes men, in Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad, especially those before the 1950s. And today, most people interpreted, or at the time of my research, godnas primarily as a sign of wifehood, as a sign of control by in-laws, of patriarchy and disciplining of women, and the suffering of the coolie woman. And many women were tattooed after marriage in the past. Many, not all. Some of these tattoos, not all, bore their husband's initials, and some women were told that they would not be accepted by their in-laws, and others without it. Indeed, during my fieldwork, many of these women spoke of pain, physical pain they experienced during the tattooing process, but also gendered violence and social constraint, and feeling coerced into getting these tattoos. A common sentence, a very common sentence I heard was an explanation. If you did not have godna, your parents-in-law would not eat your food or take water from you. And this was said by the women or the people who actually had the godna and others who had heard about it from their grandmothers or great-grandmothers. Another example from Guyana was when I started an oral history interview with Auntie B. She rolled up her sleeve and said, well, this is only one of the marks he gave me, referring to gender-based violence and other scars she had received through her husband. So yes, godnas could function as a technology of control. But I argue technologies of control can also become technologies of negotiation and sometimes even technologies of subversion. And to see that, we have to listen more carefully to what some of the women themselves said. When I conducted long interviews with senior women, and we're speaking about women born in the 1920s and 1930s mostly. So these women were tattooed in especially the 1930s and 1940s, so early post-Indenture-Caribbean countries contexts. Many of these women described their own godnas in ways that do not fit the contemporary submission narratives. These women spoke of purification, initiation, discipleship, and spiritual rebirth, and several explicitly described their godna as a form of Hindu baptism. For example, Sunita. She said, and others, that it marked them as the chela, the disciple of a guru. And they framed this as the guru in the context of the so-called Gurmukh ritual. So a Gurmukh, according to Sunita here, is a person who has a guru. And so a disciple or a student of a guru. And this is extraordinary. This is important because this status, this role mattered socially. Initiation and becoming the disciple of a guru did not just create devotion, but it also created religious authority. So women told me that their godna actually allowed them to act as judgeman. and a judgment is a ritual patron responsible for conducting household ceremonies and doing the fire offering especially. And this is crucial because historically, Orthodox Hindu structures often excluded women, lower caste persons, and those without this specific ritual initiation. Yet here we hear from Indo-Caribbean women who used tattooing initiation to claim participation in precisely these ritual domains. And this was not open defiance against this subversion, but we can argue that it was probably a restructuring of who could act ritually. A rather quiet, but I would still think a very profound shift. And so this bodily mark, the godna, actually functioned as a means of authorizing and recreating religious authority. And this is supported by some historical documentation I found, as you can see on this slide, where de Klerk, a missionary, Christian missionary in Suriname, actually documented that the Gurmukh ritual was considered a Hindu baptism and was preventing the conversion to Christianity, but I will come back to this later. To understand why this mattered, we must remember the historical environment. So post-Indenture-Caribbean societies were shaped by different overlapping hierarchies, and there was colonial Christianity defining respectability. There were internal Hindu struggles over caste and authority. There were reform movements challenging Brahmanical domination and the pressure to convert to Christianity for social mobility. And Hindu communities were not simply preserving traditions, they were actively reorganizing religious life under colonial pressure. In this context, initiation practices like Gurmukh and their bodily markers did several subversive things simultaneously. So they challenged Christian monopoly over spiritual rebirth by offering Hindu equivalents to baptism. They challenged Brahmanical control over ritual knowledge by enabling alternative routes to religious legitimacy, and they challenged gendered exclusion by allowing women ritual participation otherwise restricted to them. They also challenged caste hierarchy by marking devotion directly on the body rather than on focusing on inherited status. And this is structural subversion, not of colonial rule or Christianity itself, but of the layered hierarchies that shaped Hindu-Caribbean religious life at this point of history. And the body then itself became a site of irreversible commitment and resistance. Why is that so? Tattoos, I always argue, provide an aura of permanence. So in colonial settings where Hindu practices were stigmatized as backward or uncivilized, permanently marking one's body with Ram's name, Ram, a very prominent Hindu deity, or other devotional symbols was not neutral. So this was a declaration. It was a refusal of erasure, a refusal of assimilation, and a refusal of conversion. So Ram Nam was very often part of the Godna tattoo, as you can see here in all the different countries that I talked to senior Hindu women born at this time. Missionaries saw tattooing as heathen and uncivilized, and some members of Hindu orthodoxy at the time rejected it for respectability reasons as well, and others still adopted and adapted it. Why? Because this aura of permanence is powerful, and a tattoo cannot be removed without violence. So it fixes religious belonging onto the body itself. And here again, we find historical documentation where we see that the Gurmukh was used as a way to prevent conversion. So the Godna operated, I argue, as devotion, identity, initiation, boundary, and resistance to religious conversion. And thus the body became both archive and argument. And now I want to contextualize this a bit more specific historically. So tattooing the name of Ram has precedence in anti-caste devotional movements in India. And some of these currents traveled or were also reinvented in the Caribbean through so-called Hindu missionaries. Movements such as the Kabir Panth or Satnami movements rejected Brahmanical hierarchy and emphasized direct devotion. Movements such as the Kabir Panth had a very strong following in early 20th century Caribbean countries, which you can also see in historical documents. And for example, one of the senior women I spoke with actually explained that her father was a Pandit or Kabir Panth Pandit, and he had actually, encouraged her to get the Godna, not her husband, and this was something she insisted on. Also, in Guyana, I encountered women who explained to me that specifically the Pandit would encourage a woman to get the Godna, not husbands or in-laws. In a colonial setting where both Christianity and Sanskritic orthodoxy competed for authority, tattooed initiation offered something radical, I think. Spiritual legitimacy that did not depend on inherited status. When women or lower status individuals received Godnas through guru-disciple relationships, they were not simply submitting, they were entering alternative networks of authority. Reformist gurus could expand their following and marginalized individuals could gain ritual standing. This, I think, was a redistribution of religious power mediated through the body. So what does this mean for contemporary feminist interpretation and the relevance of history to indentured laborers? So when I presented my findings at a conference in Suriname and discussed it also with my interlocutors, a feminist friend, Indikeri, suggested that the senior woman I had spoken with had reinterpreted the suffering to make it sound more meaningful to me. And I do understand this reaction. This is very understandable. Indo-Caribbean feminism has had to fight powerful narratives of silence, endurance, and gendered violence, and emphasizing oppression has been politically necessary and very important. But if we only see domination, we risk repeating another kind of silencing, and that is dismissing how women themselves understood their actions and understood their godnas. And if we do this, we run the risk of reproducing this persistent trope of the suffering coolie woman that has been already addressed by Marina Carter and Kaltura Bulli in 2002. So subversion does not always look like resistance in modern political terms. Sometimes it may look like ritual participation, embodied commitment, quiet shifts in authority, and a reinterpretation of hierarchy from within specific traditions. And these are forms of everyday structural negotiation. They do not abolish patriarchy, but they reshape how it operates and grants women some capacity for agency, I think. Why this matters for descendants of indentured laborers, or maybe it does not. You can maybe tell me, some of you might be able to tell me, but I think that for descendants today, this meaning of these histories is profound. If we interpret these women only as victims, we inherit a history of endurance. And if we recognize their negotiations, innovations, and their subtle reorganizations of power, we inherit a history of creative survival. Godna shows that Indo-Caribbean women were not only subjected to religious social systems, they also helped remake them. They participated in reform, they redistributed ritual authority, and they stabilized Hindu identity under colonial pressure. They marked belonging onto their own bodies, and that is historical agency, even when exercised from within constraint. And I conclude now. Godna teaches us that bodies can carry layered history at once: submission and strategy, constraint and authorization, discipline and devotion, control and subversion. In post-Indo-Caribbean societies, tattoos such as Godna helped to reproduce hierarchy, but they also quietly destabilized it. Reimagining feminism after Indian indenture means recognizing these entanglements. It means listening to subalternized women not only as victims of power, but also as participants in its reconfiguration. The marks of devotion were also marks of negotiation, and sometimes they were marks of subversion written directly into the skin. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow, Dr. Senna, this is quite extraordinary. Thank you so much. We have some hands up for questions. And ladies and gentlemen, if you did not notice, we do welcome your questions. So please raise your electronic hands, which you will find in the reactions button at the base of your screen. Dr. Roseanne Kanhai, we haven't seen you in a while, so it's wonderful to have you. Let's take your question, please. Dr. Roseanne?
She has to
Okay, she
has to unmute.
Okay, while we wait, let's
yeah,
take Weibing's question. Weibing, go ahead, please.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I actually have many overlap with my current research. I'm also talking about how Indian women, they are not subverting patriarchy, but they are rewriting Ramayana, like recreating songs or everything like that, like to create a space of freedom and agency for themselves. So it's like what Celia Hartman calls like the refusal to be governed, right? But I'm just thinking a lot about what is the implication of this refusal and this creation of their own alternative lives. Can they be transformed into resistance? Can they give them really give them more social power, or give kind of encourage them or the future generation to, I don't know, directly confront patriarchal power when they are oppressed? So I'm always thinking, we talk about creating alternative is important, but can it be transformed into resistance? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
So I think, yeah, I do think that there was resistance. When I think about some of the women and the way that they, I mean, this is like a small part, a small part. This is why I did the pre-recording, by the way. A small part from a very long life history they were telling me. So, for example, Daro, she later on also said how she directly challenged her pundit and basically wanting to do the funerary rites of her husband. And the pundit said, no, your son has to do this. And she said, no, I am second. So she was very feminist, I would say, and very, always challenging structures to the extent that she could. But I think what I got whenever I discussed these the Godnas is that I heard like very victimizing narratives about this today. And I do think that I don't want to like portray this as like only subversive or emancipatory, because I don't think this was always the case. Especially later on in women who were tattooed in like the 1950s, these tattoos came to become like actually reinforcing patriarchy. Yeah, so I think to me, like they were one sign. They were apologies. There were one sign of creating this resistance to it, but I always say to a small extent only, because there are like so many different layers. Also, one thing was that you could always add to the tattoos. So, for example, Daro had the Om tattoo, and this she linked to the Guru and her Pandit. But later on, she got the initials of her husband. So, you know, yeah, like it's very very difficult to say these were only like creating resistance or only creating subversion. So I think there's always a very complex layer to this.
Okay, extraordinary. Hi, Savaran. Hi. Okay, when he's ready. So I just always had this notion that the Godna was the very first marriage certificate for indentured women. So now can you talk a little bit to that and whether or not this has been found in India? Thank you.
Yes, so there's also much historical discussion by British ethnographers about tattooing, for example, in India. But there's like what you can read is that there's not one explanation of why different women from different castes, different age groups got these tattoos. So there are explanations, for example, from Bengal, where you have women getting this kind of after marriage, and in a way that reproduces the discourse saying, "I had to get this, otherwise the in-laws wouldn't drink the water or eat the food that I prepared." But sometimes, and this is also sometimes what I heard, is that. Um, they would some of the women would get the tattoo when after their marriage indeed, but when they were again with their family. So they spent 2 days after marriage with their husband's family to return to their family because they were still very young. So they had to wait until puberty to actually return to the family, the husband and his the in-law family, and they actually got the Godna with their mothers on their lap. With their mothers. So they got it after the marriage. After apologies. It's he's been sick.
It's all right. It's all right. That's no problem.
Yeah, talking about feminism, right? So I'm a single mom, and when the child is sick, you have to do all at once. So yeah.
We understand. Thank you very much for that. Kumu, you have your hand up and thanks for your patience. Go ahead with your question, please. Kumu Gupta. Okay, not seeing her unmuted. Daryl? Daryl, go ahead with your question, please. They're not unmuting. Cannot unmute. Dr. Mahabir, can you assist me?
Yes, are you hearing me now?
Yes, Daryl, go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering if you found any cases of tattoos purely for vanity, as is common today.
Yeah, indeed, especially among women born like from the 1950s. Women said, you know, I just got it to look big, to play big. That's what they said in Guyana, for example. I wanted to look nice, and so there was again a shift where this changed, or particularly also when you got. A peacock, an elephant, or a tree, or something, or flowers. This was again also a layer, and I think this was also a part of it because very often women explain that they got this together with their mother or sister, and they would sometimes the mother would add a flower to the design while they got actually the bigger design. So I do think like ornamentation also did play some role. Thanks for the question. Yes.
Okay, great. Let's take a question from Dr. Roseanne Kanhai. Dr. Kanhai, can you unmute? Okay, we seem to be having some technical difficulties because host is changing quite often. So for those of you who are unable to unmute, please put your question in the chat if you don't mind.
Yes, Roseanne is here. She can talk
unmuted?
now. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Klotz, for your presentation. I'm wondering if you found any evidence that the women who did have goodness, if it gave them in some way a sense of community within a pluralistic environment. Because, whatever happened with the Gona in India, whatever the context, that context changed when they found themselves in a pluralistic society, sometimes in a society where they were a minority group, where they were a marginalized group. So then the meaning of the Godna would take on some of the aspects of what their reality was at the time. Did you discuss that with them, and how did they respond?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, this was like a central part that I was trying to find out, also looking at the archival data, because I was always wondering, like, was it like a practice that was, how common was it in India, or did this take on a specific dynamic in the Caribbean? So I did actually look with the help of many others through some of the archival data to see how many of the women were actually registered with the tattoo, because you can see this in the immigration records, and to find out how many of them actually had a tattoo. And it was very little women, like not a high number of women did have these tattoos. And this could again also be for very different reason, but this led me to hypothesize that for some reason these tattoos like got a specific meaning in the Caribbean context. And I do think that the plural society, the pluralistic context, especially with these religious dimensions, Christianity, what I mentioned in the talk, had a significant impact. And I think marking the body with a Hindu, with an Om sign or Ram Nam, actually did do something for community building, for addressing the constant threat of conversion, which was something that I think was very persistent. So I do think it gave a sense of community, but again, only in the very first, I think like the 1920s, 30s, maybe. If anybody is here who maybe knows more also about the prevalence of the tattooing in the Indian context, I would be thrilled to have a conversation about this, because it's still something I'm not 100% sure how popular it already was in India, and what these numbers that I have now, the historical numbers, actually tell us or can tell us. But thank you so much, Roseanne, also for your question, because I am a great admirer also of your work, obviously.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Dr. Gabriel Hussain.
Hello.
Welcome, Dr. Gabriel Hussain. Dr. Shadanan, can you hold, please?
Yes, I can hear you. But can you see me?
Yes, Dr. Shadanan, but Gabriel, just
You
one
have to
minute, please.
you
Let's
have
just
to
take him
unmute
to the
my
mic.
video. I cannot do that.
Okay,
However,
yes. Mhm.
Namaste, Dr. Professor Sinaji. How are you? Oh my God. This is so important. I know my mother. They had everywhere Godana. As a little boy, I looked at them, what is this? But she had it, but she could not explain what she had. Maybe her mother-in-law, my Aji, and every woman, old woman in my family has, it is calling Godana, Godana. And when people came once in a month, and you say Godna, Godna, le lo, Sita ke rasoi, moi, moi. Very good Godnas I have come and take. And it was a privilege to have such a thing. Well, second, I haven't seen last time when I was in India and coming, most time I'm there, no one lady has in the village Godana. Very strange. Third one, here in the Netherlands, the youngest generation, my daughter, all of them are full of Shiva Godana. I don't know where they have the Godana. All the body is Godana. I say, why? God have made you so beautiful. That is, but thank you very much. You brought this thing. I never know that you can do a research on this case. Thank you very much. Dhanyavad, everyone. Hari Om.
Thank you. Any comment, Dr. Sana?
Yes, thanks. And I also do think that we have to keep in mind that there are, I mean, the ones on the arm here are the most common that I saw, but there are many different ones. For example, a woman in Trinidad, she had one on her chest, and she said this is actually directly linked to her mother because she got this specifically that because the tattooist told her that if she gets this tattoo, she will reach her in time. And she explained this, that she worked in a different plantation. And it would take a very long time when she, like, if she heard that her mother was passing, she would like try to catch the train and get to her. And having this tattoo assured her that she would reach in time. And she actually told me she did. So, like, there are multiple layers, multiple tattoos that women have, and I do think they tell us many different stories, and also that these stories obviously can change over time. And so I did find this quite fascinating. And if you allow me to point out again the importance of Daro, who would have turned 102 3 weeks ago, and I had invited her actually to join us today, and she recently passed away. And yeah, so I think I'm just very much in awe of some of these women and their stories.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm so sorry to hear that she passed on. It would have been lovely to have her. So let's hear from Dr. Gabriel Hussein, who needs no introduction to this platform and who, as I said before, inspired today's topic. And I hope, Dr. Gabriel Hussein, that you would also take this opportunity to share with them the call for submissions.
So,
Yeah?
greetings, everyone. Salam alaikum, Sitaram. Good afternoon from Trinidad as well. Justice Shalima and Dr. Mahabir, thank you so much for organizing this and for all of the continuing work that you all are doing around women's histories, and for mentioning the contribution of the work that Lisa Autar and I did, of course, building on the work of so many others, Professor Patricia Mohammed, Roseanne Kanhai, Dr. Mahabir, so many women. So just to say, this conversation comes in a long genealogy. Dr. Klaus, it's lovely to see you presenting this work. And hi, Seth. And just to, I mean, what you're doing is really important. The other person who has really has done some really excellent research, not yet published, has many photographs of Godnas that were taken, and that is Vishala Parmasad, who has a really stunning archive of images. So I wanted to ask two questions, and one is, would you say, and this is to anybody really just trying to understand this phenomena, would you think that it is appropriate to describe Godnas as a form of women's, or as a form of folk art in which women then used, or in which this aesthetic practice was used to construct multiple different kinds of meanings? And I ask that because for women's bodies, there are godnas, there was jewelry, for example, and we don't think of these as forms of art because of how we conceptualize art in very different ways. And I wondered if that might be something that you think could, a way of thinking that could reflect and honor even the way that your respondents and participants and the women thought about it. And then secondly, I wondered if the Gotnas in any way shaped marital practices. And I asked that because I have a student, Shalini Bahadur, who's looking at practices of sindoor wearing practices among married women. And one of the things is to look at that relationship between the markings on the body and then what the body performs in terms of the meaning of those markers. And, you know, for those women that did have godnas, did it shape how they may have lived wifehood? And, you know, the period between getting one. So, for example, the godna wala would come through villages, and so you might have to wait a while before you got yours. Was it also seen as a marker of a different type of expectation on your behavior and your practice of wifehood? So thank you, and thank you very much for organizing this session.
Thank you, Gabrielle, also for your very thought-provoking questions. I would personally do always think of these godnas as art. But I'm not 100% sure. I mean, very likely I cannot generalize because I do think many of them who carefully chose the design, they would have maybe thought about it as art as well. But often, especially the ones tattooed from the 1950s, they were not able to choose the design. So the mother-in-law chose that, or somebody else. And for example, like one woman in Severin doesn't like my answer. One woman in Suriname, for example, she didn't want me to take a photograph of the Godna, which was fine, obviously. But I will never forget her words because they were so strong. She said, "Het is rommel. That's garbage. That's nothing." And she like tried to cover it. So for her, it really was like not art. But yeah, that's a very long answer. It's like, to me, definitely, I would always look at it as a kind of art, in combination also with mehendi and other practices. And then about the status, the marital practices, I do think that the Godna did have an effect. So they were not just for like they were not just symbols. So they actually actively did something also for the ritual purpose, for which I think in the 1920s and 30s they were tattooed. So they purified the bodies. And this is again, we could wonder how emancipatory is that if you have to purify your body to do a ritual. But we need to keep in mind that also like male bodies needed to be purified to actually do rituals. So like the initiation, etc., was also about purification. So it did affect the body and things that you were allowed to perform. Thus, I do think this had a very direct effect also on how bodies were considered. And I do have a publication where I say also that rhythm, vibrations, and then I link it to tattooing mantras, has a direct effect on the body. Because when you look at the Ram Nam or the Om, these are also tattooed mantras. So they are not just symbols, they have a meaning. And whenever you look at these mantras or when they are tattooed, they directly affect the body. And this keeps on being reproduced even when you look at it, and then you have the sound recreated in your head. So yeah, thank you very much. I hope this answered some of the questions.
It seems that it did. I'm seeing her shaking her head affirmatively. So yes, thank you very much. Extraordinary. Thank you so much. And I think we've exhausted the questions for you. I want to thank you very, very much for having the patience, and we've kept you talking for almost an hour. So
Thank you so much for the space to present this. It means a lot to me to have the possibility. So thank you very much.
it was our pleasure. Thank you. So I want to bring on our next speaker now. I'm going to change things a little bit because we have our live speaker, Sujaya, waiting very patiently, and we have a presentation from Mauritius that's pre-recorded. So Sujaya Devi Ramprasad Singh is from Canada, but we are claiming us. Her parents were from right here in Trinidad. She's a PhD student, an author, researcher, and course instructor at the University of Toronto, specializing in media, technology, and cultural relations in the Indo-Caribbean diaspora. So let's get her take on this topic. Welcome, Sujaya.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Just give me one moment to pull up my slides.
Sure.
I will note that this presentation is adapted from a recent conference I attended right at home at the University of West Indies. I was just at the Canadian Caribbean conference, so I've done my best to simplify some of my research for a shortened presentation. The working title is Negotiating Identity and Advocacy. I'm looking at Indo-Caribbean Canadian media or ethnic media as sites or spaces of social integration. But before I started, I just also wanted to say a happy International Women's Day. It's really special to be connecting with the community. I just recently learned of the ICC through the Canadian Caribbean Conference. So it's really cool to be here and to be listening to all of these speakers and learning about each of you and your research as well. I won't explain all of my background, but I have done my master's, my bachelor's, as well as my current PhD research in media, communications, culture, and technology. I have published some diasporic collections that speak to the Canadian Indo-Caribbean experience through short stories and poetry, and it's been published through my 2 books and also as part of an anthology. I have done a lot of work more so in the media and culture side of things, but after working in the industry for quite a few years, I realized that I am a lifelong student, and I returned back for my PhD studies to connect some of these dots and some of the work that I was doing outside of academia. So to begin, I am currently focusing specifically at the Indo-Caribbean Canadian diaspora. There are many reasons why I've chosen this, aside from being part of the community. In terms of ethnic media, I'm often referring to the marginalized and diasporic communities that are producing by and for their communities in a Canadian media context. So currently, Indo-Caribbean Canadians and youth are significantly underrepresented, especially in media scholarship. Because I'm doing intersectional work, platform scholarship, which looks at the socio-economic and political aspects of online and digital content and media and things like social media platforms, don't currently tackle some of the complexities of the Indo-Caribbean as well as the Indo-Caribbean Canadian diaspora. In Canada specifically, there is no official disaggregation, meaning that people often categorize themselves or self-select other or mixed or South Asian, but there isn't necessarily a categorical representation for the Indo-Caribbean population at this time, although it is starting to surface a little bit more. Because of this lack of representation, there's a lack of systematic mapping of the Caribbean Canadian digital space. So although in Canada, a lot of media scholars look at the South Asian diaspora, other monocultural or minority groups, the Indo-Caribbean is still underground and still developing. And a lot of my work aims to sort of bring that to the surface and capture some of the complexities of our diverse multicultural experiences in connection to our histories and shared histories of indentureship. what I aim to do, as I'm still in progress of doing this research in my second year now, is to understand in spaces like Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or now X, on blogs and websites, what identity, belonging, and advocacy look like for this Indo-Caribbean community. I have thankfully, I guess, manicured my algorithm right now, and it has shown a lot of the Indo-Caribbean content, not just in Canada, but across the diaspora. And that dynamic was something really interesting to me, which is part of where I learned that this digital diaspora exists. So to sort of target what I'm looking for currently, I'm looking at the ways in which Indo-Caribbean Canadians, specifically digital initiatives, are articulating identity and belonging. So the ways that their community groups or individual or creative accounts are mentioning and using keywords and using text and media and images in digital spaces to communicate this type of identity and connect with one another. I'm also curious in understanding how they're mobilizing the digital communities into forms of in-person community and advocacy, both online and eventually in person. And I'm also interested, and this is one of the ways that my work extends from traditional ways of ethnic media studies, is what do these practices reveal about the Canadian and Caribbean future? So what does this mean in terms of bridging gaps and bringing communities together and securing a Caribbean and Canadian and Indo-Caribbean identity when in a space like Canada, which is increasingly multicultural, it can be quite a challenge to retain cultural identity and heritage and document that. So these are all points that my research is aiming to encompass right now. In terms of my conceptual framework, I'm really happy and super surprised to see both Dr. Hussein and Dr. Ottar in the audience. I did not know they'd be here, but that's so cool. I am using the Indo-Caribbean feminist epistemologies in my work. It has been one of my, I would call it almost a Bible or a guide in tapping into the Indo-Caribbean feminist work. In my faculty specifically, a lot of the feminist work that we are introduced to or are recommended are often from a colonial perspective or often misrepresent or don't represent the Indo-Caribbean or the complex feminist experiences and epistemologies. So it's amazing to connect with you and to be in the same space. I am also working from a media perspective, and media often people think of things like television, radio, broadcast, print, and documented forms of media where we share and communicate information. But ethnic media studies right now, it also is looking at the ways that marginalized communities and diasporic communities are participating within multicultural spaces and are representing and creating and sharing within media spaces. I am adding that media studies is now starting to, and sort of at the beginning of understanding how other forms of media created by marginalized people themselves and communities themselves on these digital platforms, social media networks, and other digital spaces, they are now being considered forms of media that weren't being considered previously. So in addition to that, the media that is being produced in these digital spaces often is facilitated by technology. So I'm really interested, especially right now when we have algorithms and digital structures and infrastructures that are mediating and guiding and facilitating information. I'm really interested in some of those aspects of these digital platforms and understanding what that means for visibility and engagement and identity work. Particularly right now, I'm looking at Instagram as a starting point. With platform studies, as I'm diving into it right now, and I'm still, looking at a lot of literature and exploring a lot of it, we're also seeing a rise of artificial intelligence, and that is something that is also really concerning and also very interesting intellectually in understanding what that can do for and also against these communities when they are working with these digital spaces. So currently, I am in the process of creating my data set and getting some data sampling. I am scouring the internet and looking at different digital platforms, social media accounts to really identify and analyze the Indo-Caribbean Canadian ethnic media, social media accounts and organizations and content creators and influencers. And it's been a little bit tricky because I have been looking specifically at keywords in order to see people who are self-identifying or organizations that are self-identifying as Indo-Caribbean in a Canadian space. And I have looked at keywords, hashtags, Instagram recommendations. I've looked through different algorithmic experiences in order to trace them and track them down. And from there, I created a code across 20 different variables. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of that in this presentation, but that have sort of guided me in understanding how these groups are, at least from a more quantitative sense, identifying and labeling themselves in these digital spaces. So at this time, because there's so much content out there, I'm starting off with Instagram because it seems like Instagram is one of the hubs and hotspots for Indo-Caribbean ethnic media, particularly in Canada. But from there, I will expand and start to look at some of the other digital platforms and social media spaces that are prominently sharing and interacting with and representing the Indo-Caribbean community. Some of the highlights that I've seen so far, and of course, this is a work in progress, so I don't want to list any conclusions at this point. But for one thing, there is a strong articulation of the Indo-Caribbean identity and the Caribbean identity in the locality of Canada. I think that was something really interesting because the term Indo-Caribbean was something that I learned about years ago, ironically, through the use of social media, where activists and people that I was following in communities started to use that term instead of just Trinidadian or instead of just Caribbean or Canadian. The label sort of shifted my way of thinking about the way in which we position ourselves. And that was something that the data so far is indicating. The other things that I've noticed so far is that there is an amazing community orientation, and it is grounded in connection, it is in care, it's in collective uplift. There are many groups that are looking at supporting the community, doing fundraisers and care, all sorts of community initiatives to bring the community together in person as well as online. The other points, which brings us back to some of the conversations we've had today, is that there is an emphasis often on sharing histories of post-indenture, giving people exposure not just to the Indo-Caribbean community itself, but often to Canadian communities that might not know the history of indentureship, particularly for Indo-Caribbean people. And at this time, I'm noticing there's less attention to the migration narrative, so stories from indentured times, but more so looking at the historical perspectives. Another aspect, which is one of the feminist things that have been more prominent and developing more so in the last year or two, is the presence of women-centered and queer-affirming initiatives. So both digital spaces, digital initiatives, as well as in-person events and activities and supports and resources, particularly in Canada. I will note that a lot of these Indo-Caribbean digital initiatives often happen in the Greater Toronto area, so in the province of Ontario. But there are some smaller extensions in some of the other provinces like Alberta, but the GTA so far seems to be sort of the hub and the hotspot for much of the Indo-Caribbean digital narratives. Lastly, there is selective but meaningful civic engagement. And of course, I mentioned mental health before, but there are also many anti-violence and community support initiatives that are popping up. And they're extending beyond just Instagram accounts. They're often spaces or hubs or websites or indexes that are being produced by the community. and that are being used and grown day to day. So it's been very fruitful, but I know I still have many, many accounts to analyze and add to this in the next 2 years. So with that said, where I stand right now, I am working to expand my data set to locate and identify as many as I can, essentially producing the first digital Indo-Caribbean media mapping of its kind. I am looking to also eventually connect with the audience as well as the producers of the Indo-Caribbean media outlets, and that will be part of my PhD research. And doing that through interviews, focus groups, and other in-person or digital initiatives if possible, depending on accessibility. And the findings hopefully will highlight how digital Indo-Caribbean media are able to strengthen cultural continuity, supporting transnational ties, and also contribute to sustainable digital Canada-Caribbean futures. So that's where I'm at so far. I hope in a year or two to give you some stronger updates and some more concrete examples that we can put into fruition. But with that said, I'm also sharing my email in case anyone has anything, accounts or information or readings, anything you find relevant or interesting. I'm always happy to connect and chat. My email is the longest Trinidadian email ever, so I'm always representing even with my email address. But that's all I have to share for today. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Sujaya. I was hoping to hear a little bit more about Indo-Caribbean feminisms, for example. Have you found anything in that regard? And practitioners perhaps, or persons across there who are doing work in that regard?
Definitely. I think right now, the reason why I didn't go into it is because there is a ton. There's so much and an abundance of Indo-Caribbean feminist work being done. One particular account or group that is doing a lot of really prominent work right now is the Brown Girl Diary, and they are both in person and online doing a lot of Indo-Caribbean feminist work, supporting both the diaspora in Canada as well as across the Indo-Caribbean nations and countries. But in terms of scholarship, I would say in my faculty in particular, that has been one of the central challenges that I have had. Finding Indo-Caribbean feminist work and scholarship was one of those areas that I am still and continuing to connect and read and sort of ask questions, because the Indo-Caribbean perspective has been really, really underutilized and not even mentioned even at the PhD level in my faculty in Toronto. So currently what I have attempted to do is work with some of my professors in bridging that gap and finding other relevant scholars, PhD students, other supervisors outside of my institution to sort of supplement that gap, because my starting point was from both ethnic media and platform studies. So I have quite an extensive reading list that is being populated, and a lot of it now, thankfully, has some of the Indo-Caribbean feminist perspectives being added. So if anyone has anything else they want to lend me, I'm happy to also read that too.
Okay, terrific. Dr. Mahaber, do you have a question?
No.
I see that you are unmuted.
Yeah,
Dr.
no.
Hussain, go ahead, please.
Hi, Sujaya. Your work is super exciting. So thanks so much, and thanks again for this space where I wouldn't have come across your work otherwise. And I think you're right, you're exactly where you're supposed to be in this moment in terms of looking at community building through the online space, where so much that's happening is so exciting and creative and political as well, and feminist. As Shalama rightly said, there is so much feminist work happening through the online space that it really constitutes a kind of a sphere of organizing that has not been written about or theorized at all. So even in terms of Indo-Caribbean feminisms, you are really doing path-breaking work. And I can't wait to see where this goes. I just wanted to maybe ask one or two things. The first is, to what extent does the online space of Instagram, let's just say, allow also or encourage also a, a conversation with an indenture cartography, so the other sites of indenture. And I think about that in terms of the ways that you may get South Africans. So, for example, in the scholarly space and in this space, you're getting people from so many sites of indenture engaging with each other in a space actually curated from the Indo-Caribbean. And I'm interested in whether you are able at any point to explore the way that history of making connections across the indenture cartography is also happening online. I think that would be a kind of interesting observation. And then the second thing is that just as you develop this work, the different platforms meet different communities. And so, to what extent are these different platforms accessed by different generations? Like, how is generation engaged with the digital in different ways? And then finally, to what extent do you think that these digital spaces allow Indo-Caribbean Canadians who are coming to terms with what it means to connect to their heritage, to what extent do you see it also being a space for them to articulate a kind of politics of the moment where they are responding to current forms of inequity, and from an Indo-Caribbean perspective, being political leaders, not party politics leaders, but exercising a kind of political leadership that I think has long been part of Indo-Caribbean history of protest and resistance and so on. So just congratulations on this incredibly exciting and innovative work.
Thank you so much. And these are all amazing questions. I was writing them down so I don't forget. And if I can't answer it perfectly right now, I will have to connect with you again and give you some updates. But to, I think, go back to the first question you were mentioning, because the Indo-Caribbean diaspora is so vast and it is not limited to just the region of Canada. And there are so many Indo-Caribbean groups, diasporic groups that are still overlapping in the digital space. So that has been one of the things that I started off with the Indo-Caribbean diaspora more generally, and working with a PhD level timeline and limitation. My supervisor said, you'll be going through Instagram accounts and all these things for maybe years if you're trying to map everything. So start local, and then once, my aim is to build sort of an inventory or a data set of starting points. So maybe a media directory that we can use. And then from there, hopefully it'll be something more permanent that these other Indo-Caribbean groups can continue to add to, because many of the accounts and practitioners and media creators, they are not just sharing Canadian Indo-Caribbean content, they're sharing things across the diaspora, both in the Caribbean and beyond. So it is tricky at times to find things that are specifically Canadian just for the sake of my study. But the intention is, once the study has started and it has its roots in some sort of infrastructure, that it will be able to facilitate a much larger impact later on and invite many other Indo-Caribbean creators, media practitioners, both feminist and not, to have some sort of visibility and permanence, since we are producing media in ways that are quite different from traditional forms of books and print and radio and broadcast. And I guess my anxiety or fear in seeing a lot of this content in the digital space is that what happens to the permanence of these things? What happens to this memory and heritage and preservation if these accounts or if these platforms change their policies or people delete the accounts? So, there is that question there of, how do we preserve memory and heritage when it is now more and increasingly digital? I wish I had a concrete answer. I think we'll see more as this project unfolds. In terms of the generational question, I do think right now my focus is more so on the diasporic youth, so people that are 18 up to 35. In terms of like media studies, that's usually the range that youth ethnic media evaluates. In terms of that, I tend to see the highest concentration of digital media use and activism and engagement, even with some of the younger populations, still on Instagram more so than TikTok and X and some of the other platforms. That is why I'm starting with Instagram for now. However, I do agree that there is a difference often in platforms in terms of content and delivery and intentionality and use. Platform studies is very vast. I could go on about it forever. But having a starting point, I think, at this point, since it is sort of uncharted territory, I wanted to intentionally start where I saw the highest volume of use. In terms of the generational difference, however, I noticed that the Indo-Caribbean community on Facebook is more of the, I would call it like the boomer generation. They are mobilizing and creating groups and creating community and producing all kinds of media or personalized media in ways that the youth are not. So I do think that like these could be two separate studies looking at Indo-Caribbean dynamics between people born in, say, the 50s and 60s versus people born in the 90s. But I think if I started off with that, which is what I did at the beginning, I had just this boundless, like endless amount of data to look at. And I was starting to feel like, oh my God, I need more than 4 years to investigate this, which is also super exciting to think about. Then your last question, to what extent the digital space allows and sort of encourages the identity and politics and sort of this advocacy to continue. I see it in two ways currently. I think it might be more. One, I think, is more of a passive Indo-Caribbean identity where people are sharing jokes and memes and they're talking about things that are fun and lighthearted, but still taking the time to add Indo-Caribbean to say their bio when they're identifying themselves. It might show up in the way that they add 2 flags beside their names on Instagram. So for example, for myself, I might have Sujaya with a Trini flag and a Canadian flag. But then there's also the other side where people are also starting to really advocate and proactively share information and represent the community through whether it's stories and music or posts or historical things. We're seeing a lot of poetry and art and feminist work and space, all kinds of things that are being created to bridge this gap of misrepresentation that has been there for so long. So a lot of people, I think one of like the shared memes was like when people ask you where you're from and say you're not Indian enough and you're not Caribbean enough. And that is sort of one of those Indo-Caribbean experiences that is increasingly online. And with this visibility being built and created and shared, I do think that it encourages in some ways people to sort of adopt those terms and take them on and feel like they are included rather than being excluded from the community. Even someone like myself, being born in Canada, there's always like that little bit of displacement feeling like, well, like I'm not Trini enough. But then sometimes I was born with my Caribbean parents, my grandmother, like teaching me how to make roti and everything at home. So these spaces, I think, are often achieving that goal of pulling people in and building that community, sometimes in ways that the in-person communities aren't able to do as often. So I'm not sure if I answered all the questions, but I think that's where I stand for now.
So Sujaya, I'm surprised you got all 3 because I was trying to keep track just to remind you I couldn't. So I'm glad you did.
Amazing.
I'm seeing Daryl has his hand up. Daryl, go ahead, please.
Hi, Sujaya. I was just wondering what percentage of the 29 media podcasts, and if you're also looking at YouTube at all.
So currently, I'm only looking at the Instagram accounts just as a starting point.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember the podcast statistics. I do know that there were two podcasts in particular that I was looking at. But once the Instagram inventory is done, then I will be going to the other platforms, including YouTube. So
Okay.
I just need time to go through everything.
I just wanted to add a little bit about the term Indo-Caribbean. It's a New York City invention in year 2000 Census Bureau, US Census. We lobbied to get ourselves, Indo-Caribbean people, to be an exclusive writing category for the census. So we were anecdotally able to prove we had more than 50,000, which was their threshold. So they approved the census task force, which we then went on to do during the census and prove there's 250,000 Indo-Caribbean people in the greater New York area. As part of that process, we had to find or create an identity. And that's how we came up with Indo-Caribbean. And of course, the biggest part of that process was then getting people to write in Indo-Caribbean when they completed the census. So that was during the 2000 census. So Indo-Caribbean, the term, we invented it here in New York City, but of course, we spread it throughout the world, and now it's very common, and we're really happy about that.
Yes, that's amazing. And I think learning from 2007, seeing that one, it had to be initiated, and two, there was also the advocacy of getting people to select it and identify as that.
Yes.
That is something that is really interesting in the online space too, because there may be tons of Indo-Caribbean people, and even I've asked friends and colleagues, are you calling yourself that? Do you use that term? They're like, yeah, I guess that makes sense, but sometimes it seems like a brand new term to people. So
one of the issues we've had here is that people are still writing in Trinidad or Guyana or Suriname.
Exactly.
Or Jamaica. So often when you write that in, it's automatically counted as Afro-Caribbean. That's the history of the US Census, counting all Caribbean people as Afro. So we still have a big task to get people to continue or to transition to writing Indo-Caribbean.
Precisely. And in Canada right now, at the University of Toronto, there is, like, if you're doing students, a census or some sort of self-identification, there is an Indo-Caribbean option. However, when you're doing anything government or anything that is official to Canada, it's still, you're either South Asian or African, or you do have to select other. And part of this work that I'm doing is to sort of advocate for the use of this term and the inclusion of this term, since there is such a significant population, like in New York, in the Greater Toronto area, of Indo-Caribbean people. So I would love to speak to you about how that experience happened and what it has turned into so far.
It's very interesting, Daryl. That's something that we need to connect with you about as well. And Sujaya, we will link you up.
Beautiful.
Okay. So Dr. Lisa Autar has her hand up. Dr. Lisa, welcome.
Hello, and happy International Women's Day to all of you. Thank you so much, Shalima and Dr. Mahabir, for for creating this forum. Here I am. Greetings from Rome, where it's evening now, but I'm very delighted to be part of this conversation. Sujaya, I'm especially excited to hear about your research. There's a reason that Dr. Hussein and I work together, and I understood that in part because I had a similar reaction to this question around the different cartographies that are pulled together by the kind of work that you're trying to do, and the ways in which different Indo-Caribbean diasporas might be, ways in which you're noticing different Indo-Caribbean diasporas being in conversation with each other. So I think that would be a particularly interesting dimension of the work to explore further. because obviously in the space that we're in now, in the space of this field in general, we're constantly in tension between the local communities that we're a part of and this much larger both nationalist identities, but also the larger indentureship diaspora that we're all we've all been affected by. You will have seen that Dr. Hussein has put in the chat a call that for a new collection that we're working on. In part, that's trying to think across the indentureship diaspora and the various forms of feminist activism, feminist creativity, feminist thinking, and local organizing that have emerged from these histories, right? Ways that are oriented across these different sites that we all belong to, and less so back towards the subcontinent. So the questions that I had for you, one was really about thinking about the platform itself. So what does Instagram in particular bring to how does it shape these articulations of identity, but also perhaps of feminism? You sort of bracketed that conversation as being a much larger one than you're able to engage with in this space today. But I wonder if maybe I can bring you back to where Dr. Kloss left us, which was the idea of these, quiet modes of negotiation and survival, which is very much the terrain that Dr. Hussein and I were theorizing around the forms that Indo-Caribbean feminist action and thinking have taken over the many decades that we were looking at. And it's in part that it's not something that always announces itself boldly as feminism, right? But it's quietly subversive in the ways in which this wonderful conversation around the godnas has evolved today. So I wonder, if there, as you're looking for feminism in the Instagram space, whether there are ways of their creative conversations that might be going on also that might not be named as such, but that may also be part of a continuum that you might weave together in your narrative around the data. The second question I had for you was really thinking around how a theme of history evolves in what you're looking at. Like, how far back does this history or the desire to engage with history go? Are there connections that you're seeing between articulations of Indo-Caribbeanness in the region that are being drawn into these spaces, especially when you're looking at say a different generation within Canada, or is it going back perhaps as far as to the generation that migrated, and what happens beyond that? What happens with the look back to the region? Are things in more of a kind of hagiography, a kind of celebration of that past without an engagement of how that's a terrain that's shifting as well. So just a kind of probing, perhaps, or suggestions for probing as you're looking at these engagements of, with how to articulate an identity about how history is being taken up.
Absolutely. These are all great questions. And I do think like a year or 2 years from now, I'll have better concrete answers for all of you. But I guess going back to the first question in part about thinking about the platform in itself, I think there are tons of platforms that are being used, and it can be tricky to select just one. I think at the time that I started this, I was thinking more broadly about the Indo-Caribbean ethnic media as sort of like a broader social media phenomenon, the Indo-Caribbean being like across the diaspora. The reason I think that Instagram has been so prominently used is it has been seen by youth, more particularly as a safe space, rather than places like TikTok that are often censored in different ways or different algorithmic biases. Instagram tends to be, and this is based off of other media studies that I've seen, one of the places that young people have continued using for, say, 10 to 15 years. So that was one of the things that has evolved in past years, but has been probably the most consistent. One of the spaces that I've been able to track down and see maybe other years of progression of content. With Facebook, for example, I found that when I looked for younger people or youth, because that's sort of the focus right now, there wasn't much data. It was a lot harder to find things that were currently being used, both for sort of the diaspora more broadly, and also in terms of like feminist work. So that for me, it's still a question in progress. I do think that in terms of the platform, I'm also working with platform studies work. So the literature there as a foundation has often looked at Instagram as an example. So I think going from those frameworks and those types of scholarly interventions, that has been where I've been able to sort of borrow from and interpret. Other things that are still newer, I think it's still very underrepresented. I think particularly in identity building and community building in terms of platform studies specifically, that is one area that is sort of calling for additional literature to be done. So it's still pretty in its infancy, and I'm not sure yet what it will look like. I do think in the next 2 years, especially with the intervention of artificial intelligence, it might be changing quite a bit. So that will be kind of fun and scary to investigate in the next little while. I think the other question that you were mentioning in terms of the theme of the history, that was something I was curious about in terms of seeing the types of information and historical questions and stories that have been shared. I have noticed so far that it tends to lead back to maybe the late 1800s, like once the ships had been docked in India and leaving from that point. I have found it really hard to trace anything beyond that. I've tried to go and see if there are people talking about records or ships or regions or locales or naming conventions that have happened leaving on the indentured ships. That right now on social media in particular has been a little bit sparse. If you guys know of anything that I've missed, please share it with me. And in terms of the region, I think I haven't seen as much experiences or histories from India in itself, like where those people were prior to the experience of indentureship. But I've seen a lot of social media information, media content, and history shared once those groups or families had docked in the Caribbean. So I do wonder if that will change in the next little while, because I've often seen that being connected to Indian Arrival Day and content from that sort of time point. But for now, I think those are things that I'm still sort of wondering like where it is, or if people themselves are having difficulties locating those histories in order to share it on social media. That's also another really good question to pose. And I think I'll have to like take that with me when I go back to my literature.
Let me, if I can interrupt, actually, to make sure that that you're clear on what I was asking. It actually wasn't about India or about going back to more deeper into the history of the places of departure. It was more around the Caribbean as a region, about how these forms of narrating identity in the diaspora are connected to the current landscape in the Caribbean region, and accepting that as a shifting, terrain that is continuing to evolve, as opposed to something that's fixed in the migrant imagination. So it was really around that idea about nostalgia, perhaps, or elegy for something that, as you were describing, perhaps a newer generation feels uncertain about their claims of belonging on that space, right? So when I'm asking about thinking in terms of those kinds of engagement with that space itself as an imagined nation or an imagined site of belonging, perhaps in the same way that earlier generations may have been thinking of India. And current generations continue to as well.
Definitely, yeah, that's a really great point. And I think the imagined site of belonging is something that is present in ethnic media, but not so much that I've seen in the digital ethnic media. So I think that's one of those things that I will have to sort of revisit in terms of my social media analysis right now.
Yeah. And Sujaya, you have to be very mindful that some of these will be fake.
Definitely.
Yeah. You need to get authentic information there. So, Dr. Lisa Otar, thank you very much. And Sujaya, thank you very much. We will be connecting with you and, of course, looking into the progress of your work. We hope to hear more. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much.
You're welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been wonderful conversations with Dr. Sina Kloss and Sujaya Ramprasad Singh. We have one presentation left, and this is from Dr. Uma Sibalak of Mauritius. She holds a PhD in International Studies from Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi in India. She's the author of a book on India's international relations called Namaste Diplomacy. And it's a pre-recorded presentation, which Dr. Mahavir will bring to you now. Can we have that, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, Namaskar. Greeting from the island of Mauritius. Today's topic, Reimagining Feminism after Indian Indentureship. As the world marks International Women's Day, we turn our gaze to the resident Indian indentured woman whose struggles, silences, and survival challenge us to reimagine feminism through the memory of those history nearly erased. When we speak about feminism today, we often think of political rights, social movements, and contemporary debates about equality. Yet, long before these ideas were formally articulated, thousands of Indian women were already living a form of feminism through their daily struggle of dignity, survival, and recognition. In the 19th century, many of them crossed the Kalapani, the feared black waters, to distant colonies such as Fiji and the Caribbean under the indenture system. They arrive as laborers in an unfamiliar world marked by exploitation, racial hierarchy, and gender inequality. And yet, within these house plantation societies, these women did far more than simply endure hardship. They rebuilt families, preserved cultural tradition, challenged injustice in the subtle ways, and laid the foundation for new diaspora societies. Their stories invite us to rethink feminism itself, not merely as a modern ideology, but as a lived experience of resilience, resistance, and transformation across generations. The history of Indian indentureship is often narrated as a story of labor migration, economic exploitation, and the transformation of colonial plantation societies. Yet, within these vast histories lies another equally important narrative. The story of women, Indian women who crossed the Kalapani during the 19th centuries and early 20th centuries were not merely passive participants in the indenture system. They were central actors in the formation of diaspora communities. Their experiences compel us to rethink feminism from a historical and diasporic perspective. This paper, therefore, seeks to reimagine feminism through the lens of Indian indentured women and their descendants. By examining their struggle, resilience, and gradual empowerment across generations, we can understand how feminism in the diaspora does not always follow the Western theoretical framework. Instead, it emerges from live experiences shaped by migration, cultural negotiation, family structures, and economic survival. The story of Indian indentured women is ultimately one of transformation. from vulnerability to marginalization to agency and leadership. Their legacy continues to influence contemporary debate about gender equality, identity, and empowerment in post-indenture societies such as Mauritius, the Caribbean, Fiji, and South Africa. After the abolition of slavery in the British Empire in 1834, plantation owners faced a severe labor shortage. To maintain the profitability of sugar plantation, they turned to India as a source of cheap labor. Beginning in the 1830s, thousands of men and women were recruited under contracts of indenture and transported across the seas to work in distant colonies. Many of these immigrants came from impoverished rural regions of India. Recruiters promised them prosperity and opportunity, portraying overseas colonies as land where fortune awaited those willing to work. For many women, this journey represents an escape from poverty, widowhood, caste restriction, or social marginalization. However, the reality they encountered was far harsher. The long sea voyages, harsh plantation conditions, and rigid colonial discipline created a system that closely resembled slavery. Women who constituted a minority among the laborers faced particular vulnerabilities. They endured physical hardship, gendered violence, and exploitation within both colonial and patriarchal structures. Yet, despite these adversities, indentured women demonstrated remarkable resilience. They were not simply victims of the system, they were also agents who shaped the emerging diaspora societies. One of the defining features of the indentured system was the imbalance between male and female migrants. Women are often represented only about 1/3 of the labor force. This demographic imbalance produced complex social consequences. In plantation societies, women occupied a position of both vulnerability and unexpected power. Their relative scarcity sometimes gave them greater bargaining power in relationship and marriage choices. At the same time, it exposed them to jealousy, violence, and control from male partners and colonial authorities. The plantation environment disrupted many traditional social structures from India, including caste hierarchies and rigid community boundaries. In this new environment, women played a crucial role in rebuilding family life and preserving cultural tradition. They became custodians of language, religion, and ritual practices. Through everyday acts, teaching children, maintaining festivals, cooking traditional food, and practicing faith. These women ensured the survival of Indian cultural identity in foreign lands. In this sense, their contribution went far beyond plantation labor. They were architects of cultural continuity. If feminism is defined as a struggle for dignity, equality, and autonomy, then the lives of indentured women offer a powerful example of feminist resistance, even if it was not articulated in theoretical terms. Their resistance often took subtle form. Some women challenged abusive relationships and left partners despite social stigma. Others negotiated new family arrangement or remarried after widowhood, practices that were often restricted in traditional Indian society. By exercising these choices, they redefined gender norms within the diaspora. Women also resisted colonial authority. Historical records from plantation colonies contain numerous cases of women who protested harsh treatment, reported abuse, or refused exploitative labor conditions. These acts of resistance may appear small in isolation, but collectively they represent an early form of feminist agency within the indentured world. This reminds us that feminism does not always emerge through organized movements or ideological manifestos. Sometimes it is expressed through everyday acts of survival, resilience, and dignity. Over time, the descendants of indentured women began to occupy increasingly visible positions in society. Education, political participation, and economic mobility gradually transformed the status of women in many post-indentured communities. Women who were once confined to plantation labor became teachers, professional community leaders, and policymakers. Their achievements reflect the long historical journey from marginalization to empowerment. Yet the legacy of indenture continues to shape gender identities in complex ways. Many women in the diaspora continue to balance modern aspiration with deeply rooted cultural tradition. They often embody both modern feminism and traditional values simultaneously. This dual identity challenges simplistic understanding of feminism as a purely Western concept. Instead, it highlights the emergence of a distinct diasporic feminism, one that integrates cultural heritage with contemporary ideas of gender equality. The experiences of Indian indentured women encourage us to rethink feminism in several important ways. First, we demonstrate that feminism is not a single universal narrative. Western feminist movements often emphasize political rights such as suffrage, legal equality, and representation. While these goals are essential, the struggle of indentured women were rooted in more immediate concerns: survival, dignity, family stability, and cultural continuity. Second, the indenture experience reveals the intersection of gender within migration, colonialism, and race. Women were not only oppressed as women, but also as colonial laborers and racialized subjects within imperial system. Third, diaspora feminism highlight the importance of community and collective resilience. Many indentured women drew strength from shared cultural practices, religious tradition, and family network. Their empowerment was often embedded within these communal structures rather than defined in opposition to them. Thus, reimagining feminism after Indentureship requires acknowledging these historical complexities and recognizing multiple pathways to women's empowerment. Today, descendants of indentured laborers live across the globe, particularly in Mauritius, the Caribbean, Fiji, and South Africa. In many of these societies, women have emerged as influencers, leaders in politics, education, academia, and civil society. Their success reflects the gradual transformation of the social landscape created by their foremothers. Modern feminist discourse in these communities increasingly draws upon the history of indenture as a source of inspiration. The stories of the early women migrants are now being rediscovered through scholarship, literature, and public history. By reclaiming this narrative, contemporary women are giving voice to generations who endured suffering but whose courage laid the foundation of modern diaspora societies. Throughout history, many thinkers have recognized the moral strength and resilience of women. Leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi emphasized that women possess immense moral strength and that societies cannot progress while half of the population remains marginalized. In many cultures, including the Indian traditions, women have symbolically represented knowledge, wealth, and strength through divine figures such as Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Durga. These cultural symbols reflect an enduring recognition of women's power. Yet the lived reality of women has often been far from these ideals. The journey from symbolic reverence to real equality remains one of the central challenges of our time. To conclude, I will tell you that the history of Indian indentured women compels us to rethink the meaning of feminism. Their story is not only one of suffering, but also of resilience, transformation, and quiet revolution. From the moment they crossed the Kalapani, these women began to reshape their destinies and the societies in which they live. Through labor, sacrifice, and determination, they laid the foundation for future generations. Their descendants today continue to advance the cause of gender equality in diverse fields, from education and politics to science and technology. Reimagining feminism after indentureship therefore requires recognizing this historical roots. It invites us to broaden our understanding of feminist struggle beyond Western framework and to acknowledge the unique experiences of women shaped by migration, colonialism, and cultural adaptation. The voices of indentured women remind us that feminism is not only a theory, but also a lived experience, a continuous journey toward dignity, justice, and equality. Their legacy stands as a powerful testament to the enduring strength of women across the diaspora. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sibalak. Shalima, are you able to speak?
Yes, I just got it back.
Okay, good.
Thank you. I think Dr. Sibalak just gave us a wonderful overview there of the feminine experience of indentureship and its legacies, and has opened some questions for us as well. You'll forgive me, I just had a little technical glitch with my computer, so I'm not going to say too much. Can I see your hand up? But I also want to, and please, yes, I'll go ahead and take your question very quickly, but she's not here to take your questions live, unfortunately. So I hope you have a question for any of our two speakers, or perhaps just a comment. And I want to recognize Professor Mark Hauser, who's in the audience. Is he still here?
Let me check.
Yes. Ken, go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, everyone. And I really enjoyed it, even though I'm a male. But what I wanted to say is that one of the ongoing themes and this is almost like a cautionary tale. I'm from St. Vincent, and within our group of Indo-Vincentians, we lost a lot of our history, and a lot of it was verbal. But we made attempts to try to document it. And one of the things that really worked well to preserve some of it were interviews of our elders. And I see also the need for documenting some of the secondary people. In other words, like I'm the first generation, but my sons are the second generation from St. Vincent. So in terms of what we were speaking about here, I'm twice removed. My sons are 3 times removed, but they're not going to retain the history or the knowledge unless there is some stories. And when I say stories, I mean literal stories, because a lot of what I learned about, my family were just from my uncles sitting around telling stories. And some of the stories were, almost like comedy. Others were more serious about life in general. So I think there's probably a way to document that. And with the technology today, if you video it, I think that's a good way of preserving preserving the heritage of the Indo-Caribbean and also the others in the diaspora.
Well, thank you very much for that, Ken. And I just want to refer you to your countryman, Dr. Lenroy Thomas.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with it.
Yeah, his book,
I read his
think.
book.
Yeah. And of course, the work of Dr. Arnold Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I see that, let me just see here.
So, with Sujai, I really see she seems very enthusiastic, but that's another media in terms of if she could capture just verbal stories, you're gonna be able to transfer a lot of heritage through those verbal stories, even if it's just like an interview. Telling your story is just a fantastic way of transferring the information.
And you'll be happy to note that she took the time to place in the chat the link to 2 Times Removed Volume 3 for you.
Yeah, I was looking for a good gift for my wife. She likes to read. So I think that would be a good one.
Terrific. Thank you very much for sharing. So, Professor Mark Hauser, I see your hand is up. Welcome. Nice to have you on the program.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be here. It is a nice honor. I would just like to say, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm an anthropologist who uses the archaeological record to try and understand a little bit more about the past. I'm a kind of an archaeologist that's called a historical archaeologist, and I think what's really important to keep in mind is a lot of what we study when we look at the archaeological record of indentured life or enslaved life or post-indentureship are actually the material residues of choices that women made in contexts. And so that it's oftentimes, while we tend to think about the material record of these pasts as monumental, it's actually some of the most interesting information that comes out of engendered life are those that really do require a feminist lens to understand the broader political economic actions. And just to think about some of the terms, some of the ideas and thoughts that were brought up. So if Gabrielle Hussein talked about cartographies, and I think for me, one of the interesting things to think about the material record, and especially of women's choices, is the way that it reveals kind of what Kanisha Prasad talked about as the kind of common sense geographies of indentureship. that become really critical for thinking about how people solve problems not of their own making.
Good, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Mark. There's a question in the YouTube, there's an audience also in YouTube for Sina. A question on did only Hindu women have these gudnas? Were there Muslim women or Christian women who had gudnas?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I personally only encountered Hindu women with a Godna, but I know from the records, the Indian immigration records, that there were few, but very few Muslim women who were registered in these historical documents as being tattooed. If it was a Godna in the sense that I showed, I do not know because these records only say tattooed on the arm or something like that. But in conversations in Guyana, Suriname, and mostly also Trinidad, it was only Hindu women I encountered. But this, there can definitely be a bias in this because it was not that there was an abundance of women with Godna that I could still talk to because, as I mentioned, many of these women unfortunately have passed on. And but I think the vast majority was Hindu. I mean, what you labeled Hindu in the 1920s obviously was different than later on also. But I think what for me was also striking was that there were that I always also did encounter some men who did have godnas, different kinds of godnas, but and this was also something that was hardly ever spoken about because many people assumed that the people I wanted to talk to must be obviously women. So, but I think there's even still more to look into, and yeah, maybe if the person wants to reach out to me, we can continue the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's such an interesting study, Sina, and I remember having really become fascinated with it when you asked us to do that research for you in the archives. And to be honest with you, coming from Muslim lineage, I don't recall any of the women in my family having gudnas. I have seen it on older Hindu women, but I've never seen it on a Muslim woman, at least not in my family and the people that I were familiar with. So I couldn't tell, although when you look at the archival records as well, because there were so few Muslims captured there, I couldn't say that that was the case. But very, very interesting. And again, yeah, more research to be done.
Yeah, and also maybe adding to what Ken mentioned, the importance also of oral history. I want to emphasize that because I did. I mean, I do have so many hours of conversation now, and I'm struggling, to even transcribe all of this. And yeah, if there was more funding available to do this kind of research, I think this would be. Not only for St. Vincent, but for so many different contexts, it would be so precious. So I want to encourage everyone to do this in addition to archival research or, well, as an anthropologist, I really am in favor of oral history. So yeah, I want to support that. Thanks, Ken, for bringing it.
Terrific. Terrific. So Sujaya, here's an area for you to look at. And maybe you need to give us some feedback as to the possibilities for you in this regard.
Yes, absolutely. I think the oral histories from my own research will be really fruitful and it will unpack a lot of the things that looking at media on its own doesn't necessarily communicate. So I'm not sure exactly what it will look like. There's so many possibilities that I am able to explore. But again, like Sina was mentioning, like we are limited by certain things. So I'm hoping to find a way that can capture these oral histories, not just by like producers and users of media, but for the Indo-Caribbean community itself, and also from a feminist perspective too. So I think now that I'm like in this space, I'm realizing that this project may end up being a lot bigger than it initially started off as, which is exciting. But now I know who to turn to ask these questions. So I'm really thankful that I've been able to connect and meet with so many of you, especially at this stage of my research. So thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we need to bring today to a close very quickly. Dr. Shadnan, I see your hand is up. Can we just take a very, very quick comment from you?
But he has to unmute, and you can turn on your video, but be very short. We'll pass the time, please. Unmute, Baba. Unmute. Okay, so try one more time. Sorry, you just had it there. One more time. Right. You can talk now, and you can turn on your video if you wish.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but we can't see you, but that's all right.
No, not matter. Listen, the Godna is especially for Sanatan Dharma women. I haven't seen by Arya. It is nothing for Christian, nothing for Muslims that I know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good. So, interesting information there for you. Thank you very much for that, Baba. All right, everyone. So it's been a very, very interesting conversation. I am so happy that we had so much participation from the members of our audience. I want to thank everyone very much. And now I turn you all over to Ashley.
Yes, thank you very much, Shalima, and very intriguing conversations. And as usual, I give my 2 cents at the end of every program. And I understand that the topic is saying that we are reimagining feminism after Indian indentureship. But I think it is, and I think Professor Uma mentioned this, that indentured, but before Indian women were fighting for social equality even before Indian indentureship. And I think that is very important that we were fighting even before that time. So, strong women, I have to say, we were really there putting it out there, saying that we can fight against being part of this patriarchal society and coming out of that and fighting for social equality and coming to the different areas that they were sent to during indentureship. In their minds, it was a way to leave that tradition behind and become their own person. So I think it is very important to understand that we as women were fighting, we as Indian indentured women were fighting even long before becoming indentured. We were already on the fighting role for gender equality, social equality, and etc., etc. So that is my 2 cents for closing this program today. And thank you to Shalima for being a great moderator as always. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to come here today and being a part of our conversation and participating and conversing with us. As was said earlier, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. And like today, we often partner with the Amina Ghafoor Institute for the study of indentureship and its legacies, led by Professor David Dabadine. Feel free to publish and contact the ICC to publish your books. Remember that we are asking you to kindly give us your suggestions. If you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials. Please contact Dr. Mahabir for details. Our topic next Sunday will be past life regression, hypnosis, and therapy. Intriguing. Thanks to our planning team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir and Shalima Mohammed. Thanks to our IT and graphic consultants, David Darrell Grantham and Navid Mungal. Please visit, like, and share and subscribe to our YouTube channel to see most of our past recordings. I am Ashley Sananan from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyavad.
Sharima, you have to play this song. You're muted. Ashley, can you try?
Yeah, I can
think we have
try
a song
again, but
we have a song to end.
Sorry, just 1 second. Let me try to share screen. Ash, I got it.
okay.
Noor, I
Yeah,
need to share.
yeah.
It's not allowing me to though. Just a
Why?
minute.
Just click on the link. Yep. Did you say share audio? You have to do share audio.
Are you hearing?
No, you have to, before you get that point, you have to share audio. There's a button there. Before you share this screen.
Yeah, just a minute.
In your share.
You all see why I normally don't do this. It's so good when Alvin is here.
Yeah, Navin is unavoidably absent today.
Noor, I'm not getting it.
So
sorry.
Ashley, can you?
Yeah.
Try,
Ashley.
thanks. I'll stop share.
Yeah. Y'all hearing what the sound is?
Yes, we hear
Okay,
you.
great.
So this is a chowtal. Okay, good. Thanks.
So what we wanted to, if I may, what we wanted to highlight there was this particular type of chowtal, which is sung in Fiji, especially for Pagwa. And this is basically a family with some friends who did this presentation at a mandir in New Zealand, recently. We'll have to double check on the
Few
YouTube.
days ago.
But
Few
this
days
was
ago.
done only a couple of days ago, and we can see several different generations. The traditions are being passed on in that generation, even down to the youngest girls. So I thought it quite fitting for today. And I want to thank you all very much for accommodating that at the last moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks to all of you. Thanks, Sina, for staying up so late and
No
everything.
problem. Sorry for the interrupt. Have a nice, evening here.
That was fine.
See you
So
soon, right? Bye-bye.
yeah, see you.
Bye.
Okay. Anybody has to say anything? Okay, so we'll close now. We'll ask you to leave. Shalima and I have to plan the next program and the following one, which would be interesting according to Ashley. It's on past life regression. So if you can kindly leave,
Did you
please.
end the
So we'll-
recording?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Bye,
sorry.
guys.
Yeah, good. So let me take over YouTube.
Ashley, you enjoyed that conversation?
Oh yeah, it was right in my wheelhouse. Trust me. I was like, oh, and from the last lady, Professor Uma, she was more talking about the history about it. So I was like, yeah, she on point.
Yeah, indeed.
As opposed, I think, and I learned something as well about this Gouda. My sister, my older sister, she was telling me about Tante who used to come over the road, and she was telling me about this tattoo she saw on her hand. And I was like, that must be what it was now that I was hearing about it. I was like, that's what it was. But Tante, I am taking out Tante, you also. All right, see you all next week.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay.
Sarojini has her hand up.
Sarojini, go ahead, Sarojini.